Hello, welcome, and thank you all for joining us to talk about returnships today. We've got loads of content to get through and a really great panel, so we're going to launch right in and get them all to introduce themselves. Andrea, if you'd like to go first.
Hi, I'm Andrea Jones from Virgin Media O2 recruitment team. I've been here for a long 25 years. I've run 3 returners program and just starting our 4th Virgin Media O2 program.
Amazing, amazing. Raj?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Gill. I am the talent acquisition lead at BT Group. So I have been with BT for nearly 4 years now and have just finished running our 2nd Careers Returns programme, which has been a great success.
Amazing. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Hodgkiss. I'm the EDI talent acquisition lead at MacDonald. Currently in the middle of running our 2nd Returnship programme for myself, but we have done it previously as well. So thank you.
Amazing. So good to have you all here. And I always forget to introduce myself because I get too excited trying to get you all introduced. I'm Beth and I'm from Flexa. We're an employer branding platform. And so anybody can come and discover companies for all sorts of amazing things like returnships, and companies get to show off all of the great things that make them unique. So anyone who's listening, say hi to us in the chat, and remember that you can always ask questions. We'll get to them throughout the conversation, or we'll definitely come to them at the end. So don't be shy and ask us lots of questions. So to kick this off, I think it would be really good for us to talk about what actually is a returnship. I know some people watching this will be familiar, but not everybody necessarily will be. Raj, do you want to speak to that? How do you define returnships? How does that happen for you?
Yeah, so when we ran the 2 internships that we've done, or the career returners that we've done at BT so far, is very much focused around putting together a real structure to what we mean by that. And for us, that was making sure that you've been out of work for 18 months or more. However, we were quite loose in terms of the reasons why, and we had loads of people apply with different backgrounds of the reasons why they've been out of work or out of the corporate world. We did have people who had, I don't know, maybe worked in like project management or had worked in a kind of a corporate style role that for whatever reason had come out of that and maybe done some volunteering or had gone into a completely different role. An example would be like working in MacDonald's or something along those lines, but very different to their corporate environment. We still accepted those applications because our criteria was very much around you've been out of corporate world of working for at least 18 months.
It's really interesting to hear that, because I think and definitely before I started learning about the world of returners and returnships, my assumption was that it was mainly for mothers choosing to return back to work after having taken time off to spend time with their kids. And I think that that's very much the public perception. So it's great to hear that there's actually a lot more variety in that. Sarah, how does it work at MacDonald? Do you have that same variety, or are you more focused on a specific area?
Well, we do it a little bit differently. So we actually ring fence particular roles, and the role level tends to be about probably mid-career, although we obviously have flexibility within that. But we don't limit it in terms of how long somebody necessarily has to be out of work. So we could have a real variety of people for a whole host of reasons. And I think in the main, you will still get, there's a real reason that women form the majority of returners because of caring responsibilities. But actually, from our experience as well, it is very much mixed, and we'll have people for very various and varying reasons of why they have been out of work. And sometimes actually a returner from our definition isn't necessarily somebody that's even been out of work. It could be somebody that has left the profession, as you say, Raj. So we've had people who built a career as an engineer and then had left and gone into teaching for 20 years and wanted to come back into the profession. So they had all of the skill set and amazing transferable experience, but they had a gap which needed support. So our program is very much focused on aiming at particular roles and then providing that soft landing for people to come back into the profession.
Yeah, super interesting. I think it's so important to consider this from all sorts of different angles. There might be people sat in the audience who have done, Raj, what you said, and gone to work at a you know, in a retail job or in a job that maybe was completely different to what they were doing before, and then are now coming back into an environment where maybe they want to either return to the work they were doing before or try something completely different. Andrea, is there any kind of variation on that, or do you tend to follow that same pattern?
Yeah, very similar. Our programs are open to people that have had that career break, generally 18 months or more. Again, if people have been working part-time or they've done something different, but looking to get back into a corporate career that they had previously. I think, you know, the beauty of the programs is that it just supports people that have had that break to actually get back into that process, which sometimes applying for just normal roles that are advertised, that can be a barrier. So actually the programs really help people, and we've had some great success.
Yeah, and there's so many different reasons why somebody might have had that happen to them. So it's a great place for us to begin, and also great to acknowledge that it's not necessarily every single person is a woman, which I think again is another stereotype that very much exists. So why did your organizations consider bringing this in and then successfully bring them in? Was that an initiative that you sort of spearheaded yourselves, or where did that come from? Sarah, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, being an engineering and consultancy firm, we are always going to have a skills shortage. So the way that we tackle that and remain competitive is by making sure that we remove the barriers for people that are in the process. So ordinarily, typically what you would find is candidates who are looking for a returnership might have struggled through more traditional recruitment routes, whether that's because of the gap or they've been in a different industry for a while. So it's another way of expanding our skill set. But also as well, we tend to find that, you know, there is more diversity of candidate there. We need people who think differently, who have different experience that they can bring that can add to our client work. So it's been a couple of drivers really, and it's been really successful and has had great, been received really well by the business too, which is good.
That's amazing. Andrea, how did it come to be with you? Where did this come from?
Yeah, it was many years ago. I think around about 9 years ago, I was at a conference, and I heard someone talk about returner programs, and I just loved the idea. Came back and obviously spoke to the business about it and looked at how we could design a program so that there weren't many companies doing it at that stage. But yeah, it was really just a lever to broaden that talent pool. There's such a great amount of untapped talent of people looking to return to work. So I think, you know, it was a great opportunity to go out and look for, you know, people that have had that break to come back in. So the business were keen, and yeah, onto the 4th program.
That's amazing that you've done four versions of this now. Sorry, there's a very loud siren going off outside my window. I don't know if you can hear that. Raj, how about you? How did this come to be? Who was sort of spearheading the initiative from your side?
I think very similar to Andrea, if I'm honest. There was a lot of questions for us in terms of how do we tap into that untapped talent. We were really challenging the business on how do we look at skills-based hiring and transferable skills as opposed to like-for-like match. And then, of course, we had the how do we broaden it out to all these individuals. And again, it's very similarly, we were at a conference and kind of came back and thought, how can we, from a TA perspective, it was all driven by TA. So how can we implement this within BT itself? And although we had a number of different roles that were out there at the moment, we kind of, although we had some roles that were ring fenced, similar to kind of back to Sarah's point, the other thing that we did do is very much focused on transferable skills and looking at how, I mean, we had one example is somebody who we hired had been out of work for 22 years and came back into a data analyst type role. And I think one of the biggest things that came out of this was just because people are out of work doesn't mean that they're not investing in terms of their continuous improvement. So how can we leverage on some of that and bring in a different span to just going off an advert from a job board? So how do we bring that and make sure that we're really diversifying the thought and tapping into really untapped talent?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's really feels like I don't work in HR or talent, but from my perspective, that's the real win. It's getting access to this massive talent pool of really, really intelligent, experienced people who just maybe didn't follow at such a linear traditional career path, which is increasingly common. More and more of us aren't doing that. Andrea, with your fourth program coming in, what do you think are the elements that make a returners program really successful? What kind of things are you including?
Yeah, I think it starts right from the recruitment process. So I think really supporting people on that recruitment journey to give that confidence. So having sort of one point in contact from recruitment all the way through the journey to help you with your interview prep and making sure that you feel supported in that journey. I think when people join the business, I think that confidence, giving confidence to people as they return. So we offer coaching workshops for the first 3 months where our returners will get some support on that transition back to work. We also give everyone a mentor and a buddy, so that's a really safe space to be able to ask questions. And we join our returners into a community of returners, so they've got a network around them of support. So I think it's just about giving, plenty of support along the way. People that might maybe have a bit of a wobble just before they're coming back, might need a little bit of extra support, or to think about the working patterns, and just offer as much support as possible through that journey.
And so would you say it's quite tailored specifically to each individual, or is there an overarching structure?
There's an overarching structure for the program, so everyone gets the same support. So they get the coaching sessions, the mentor, the buddy, and put into the network. It depends whether people join at the same time. So for some of our programs, we have a cohort joining together, so between 8 and 12 people. But we also do what we call supported hiring, which is where returners can join into any of our vacancies, and we will give them the one-to-one support. So it's 2 different paths, either joining a program or joining into any of our opportunities, but getting the wraparound returner support.
Amazing. Sarah, how does that sound familiar, or do you have a different system?
Yeah, we actually use an external provider to support us with our returnships. So we use STEM returners, and I know there's other ones available as well. And through them, we offer a similar thing. So actually, STEM returners provide mentoring, career coaching as well, which is why we wanted to use them. But then once they join us, so initially they join us on a 6-month fixed-term contract with the idea of it allows us to have a much lighter touch through the recruitment process, because it isn't about proving that you know everything, or that, and talking about your experience. Actually, you get to demonstrate that in the 6 months, and also find out, if we're the right fit for you as a candidate as well. You might not, at the end of that 6 months, we might not be quite right for you. So it allows everybody that breathing space. But during that time, we do the same as Andrea. We have, you have a buddy in place. But what's also really important is the roles that we ring fence. We really work with those hiring managers to make sure that they really understand what a returnship is, the support that's involved, the questions they need to ask at that recruitment stage to find out, the gaps somebody might have, or what concerns they have. And then we will tailor then around aspects of training and support that individual might need. But there is that overarching bit of support that then it gets tailored, depending on that individual.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because the support is kind of more obviously needed for the actual returners program, but also making sure that the hiring manager and then ultimately the team manager or the line manager also has an understanding of what's going on. How do you deal with that part of it? Is that like a special training program, or how do you deal with that?
So we run sessions with them. So it actually, in terms of even before any returner program goes live, I spend a lot of time with individual hiring managers, and that might be as a group through doing things through STEM returners, but it's actually getting them to understand how it works, what the challenges might be, what a typical return, and there is no such thing as a typical returner. I know somebody's asked a question about taking a gap because of ill health. We've had that as well. We have a whole mix of people, and everybody's situation is completely unique and individual to them. So it is about making sure line managers and buddies as well, because you need to include them in this. And it can be as simple as, for example, we had somebody that we brought on board who was exceptional, had taken a break, but she hadn't worked since before the pandemic. So one of her really big concerns was that she didn't know how to use Teams, and it was really holding her back from a confidence. And actually, that was a really simple thing to fix, to just offer that reassurance that it doesn't matter, we can deal with that. And we've provided her training, and she's flown from that perspective. So it's allowing space as well that the hiring managers know to ask the right questions, because almost it requires a little bit of vulnerability from a returner as well, to say, I'm not confident in this area. And if we can get to that, we can support them too.
Yeah. I think there's a lot in here, and when we were asking our sort of more candidate, individual worker audience before for questions and things that they were curious about returnship programs, one of the things that kept coming up again and again was around this topic of confidence, and a bit of a nervousness about feeling different, or kind of looked at as like a returner, and that's why you're there. Like, I don't know, maybe Raj, I don't know if you've had any experience with this at BT in how you've been able to make sure that everybody feels completely integrated, regardless of how they entered the business.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, we have it even outside of the returnship program. So we've got it whether someone comes through a graduate route or an apprenticeship route, or maybe has come through a return, they're coming back returning to work, but they haven't come through a returners program. So I think the inclusivity in terms of inviting people into teams is there anyway. So I think it's just kind of, for us, it was kind of very much piggybacking off the back of that. However, very similar to both Andrea and Sarah, what they were saying in terms of starting very much at recruitment and making sure that a lot of these, from a recruiter perspective, it was spending more time with these individuals to kind of go through some of their concerns, or what their worries may be as they're kind of going through the process, and addressing that as they were going through the recruitment process, as well as giving hiring managers the training and, I guess, as much support that you can in all of the situations that we could have a returner coming through, and what that would mean for them as a line manager. We also did a lot of training with teams, just to say that if they are getting a returner back into the business and someone is sitting within their team, what it may mean for them, what support that individual may require as they're coming into the business. And a lot of it was very much kind of welcomed with open arms. Bringing that kind of a different approach or a different way of thinking into the team.
Yeah. Andrea, have you got any tips for people managing these programs to make sure everyone feels integrated?
Yeah, I think probably the bit to add on, because I agree with everything there, is just around the work that the returners are doing when they come back in, and making sure that they're not undervalued, the skills that they bring from before their career break, that actually the roles that the returners are moving into are at the right level, and that as they network and get to know people around the business, we move away from introducing them as a returner. And so that's something we kind of learn after the first few programs, is just once someone's joined and they're kind of getting back into the swing of things, we don't need to keep referring to them as a returner. It's just making sure that they're working and operating at the level that that they have that experience in, and just making sure they feel included.
Amazing, thank you. And there's a lot of questions already in the chat, and I know that we had a lot of interest in the kind of communications we have with the audience before we started this from the candidate perspective. So I'd love to shift now and think a bit more about, as a candidate, what kind of things can we be doing to put ourselves in the best position. And the first thing that I really would like us to discuss is, how do you explain your career gap? This is something that so many people are nervous about, and it used to be the kind of the de facto response from companies was, oh, that's a bit suspicious. Why do you have a gap in your CV? And we were told to hide them, or pretend they didn't happen, or make something up. And that really seems to be changing. How do candidates explain it now? How do you encourage them to talk about a career gap, however long it might be?
I think it's about not hiding the career gap. It's the value that the career gap brings. You have all your previous experience, and then if you would like to talk about what you've done on your break, then absolutely put that on the CV, talk about it in interview, the kind of transferable skills that you gain from anything you may have done on your career break. It just makes you a more rounded individual. And I think it's about being proud of your journey and, you know, talking about your previous experience, but also, if you're happy to, what you've been doing on your career break.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. It's such a personal choice whether you do want to share that or not. Sarah, how do you tend to encourage people to talk about this or explain?
Well, if I'm honest, we don't really talk too much about the gap. We sort of have more of a focus at the interview point, which is much lighter touch anyway. We invite them to talk about, you know, do you want to talk us through your CV? And whatever they choose to share with us about that is absolutely fine. You know, these roles and these hiring managers, that's why we do all the work we do ahead, because it's we know we're having people that have a career gap, and that could be for any and all reasons. We don't tend to probe or question that. We accept that these people come with a gap. They may or may not share what the details are, and it's almost unimportant. And from our perspective, we're much more interested in finding out why is somebody interested in returning to work, but why do they want to come to Mott MacDonald? And actually, and what do they hope to gain from the experience? And for us, that's much more valuable than focusing on either a choice they've made or something that's happened to them. You know, it's about much more forward focusing, I think. And I think that's generally how a lot of employers, especially around a returnship program, will approach this. So yeah, I think that's the best approach, really.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about you know, it's not just why you want to return to work, but why you want to come to Mott MacDonald. You know, the kind of why us, you know, why are we the right fit for you doesn't go away just because you're coming in from a different angle. Raj, I know that you have the time limit of, time minimum of 18 months. And do you tend to see people that are kind of close to that 18 months? Or did you mention you had people up to 22 years?
Yeah.
There's a real gap. How would you say people can explain these career breaks, career gaps at whatever the length is?
So I think times are changing. So very similar to how you needed to have certain qualifications, or I remember when on job adverts it used to say that you have a minimum GCSE requirement of A to C and having a certain amount. So I think it is moving slightly. And when we've been kind of focused on that, is very much around that personal choice. Do people want to share the reasons why that they've been out? And like, don't get me wrong, we had some people that just said, you know what, I'm not prepared to share because it's too upsetting for the reasons why they've been for a career break. But for us, it was more around how can we really focus on what, number one, the reasons why they want to return to work and what flexibility they need to coming back into work after such a long time. For some people, it was having that go kind of condensed hours or working their way back up to a full-time role to make sure that they feel a bit more comfortable. And then thirdly, focusing on what skills that they've got and where we can place those skills in the business. So it was less around the reasons of why, unless they're happy to disclose that, and more around them and their skills and how we can place them into the right roles and get them the support that they need.
Yeah, definitely. And I just noticed a comment from Lindsay in the chat saying that, you know, as a mother of twin babies, which, wow, impressive, and previously being in a director role, she's saying that actually being able to take a break for someone or something should be considered a real positive thing for an organization, that shouldn't hinder their trust in you, but actually it adds another dimension and another quality to your character and the experience that you can bring. So I think that's a really lovely point. Raj, you mentioned that sometimes people need, you know, more flexible hours or core hours if they're returning to work. And I noticed there was a question in the chat earlier around returning to work part-time versus full-time. How would you recommend that people approach that conversation?
So I think it's been open and transparent from the beginning. So when we kind of brought this particular program into the business, we did have a conversation with our hiring managers to kind of really get their buy-in, and kind of have a conversation with them about what roles can be completed part-time. and what that would look like. So we very much took the approach of talk to us about what your expectations are. Part-time can mean different things to different people. So it was very much kind of candidate led. Talk to us about what you need and we will see if we can adapt to that. I mean, we did have a couple of circumstances that we had particular roles that we couldn't adapt to the needs, but what we did do is, because we were focusing more on that transferable skills and more of a driven around skills-based hiring, we were able to place them into a different role or in a different department where we could adapt their flexibility of what they needed a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sarah, Andrea, have you seen, what would your advice be around kind of alternative working patterns when people are looking to return?
We were always open to full or part-time for, when we have the specific programs. As I said, we also do bringing returners into available opportunities that we have, on our website all the time. And for those, much the same, just talk to us about the flexibility you need, and we'll accommodate, as much as we possibly can. On our programs, we generally have around about 70% of returners that want to work part-time. But actually a lot of them, after joining and working in the business and seeing the flexible working model, actually increased to full-time because they knew that they could manage it with the hybrid working of office and home and flexible patterns. So I think, as we've said, it's just, talk about what you need when you found a suitable returnship or suitable role.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're similar. Sorry. No, I was just going to say we're very similar. We advertise, all of our roles are advertised as open to part-time. We work flexibly and hybrid anyway. But I suppose, there's so many people who are in a situation that they have a career gap because previously employers possibly haven't been as flexible as perhaps they might have been, which has made it impossible with healthcare or childcare, whatever it might be. So all of our roles are offered in that capacity, and we actively have that conversation. So what ideal working arrangements does somebody need? And we have a real mix. We'll have people who, are looking for full-time work, and then we have a whole range of things in between. So we're very much open to that for all roles, regardless of returnship or not.
Yeah, it's great to hear that there's so many different methods and varieties of returning to work, that we can kind of create our own stories and build our own careers rather than feeling stuck in a sort of linear path like we used to. So how, and I think this again speaks to the conversation we were having earlier around confidence, but also around transparency. And I think that it sounds very, very much like all of your programs, they're so rich and in depth and thought through. But there's definitely a nervousness from candidates because of the sort of corporate catfishing, as we sometimes call it, that can go on in the market, of people saying they're open to something, but not actually being open to that kind of way of working. How can we tell the difference? Like what would we be looking out for to know whether this is a bit of a PR exercise or whether the company is genuinely open to returners and welcoming people back into the workforce? Andrea, go ahead.
Thank you. I think, there's a lot of conversations you can have with your recruiter that you're speaking to through the journey that will definitely be helpful. And then obviously when you're in interview stages and you're talking to the hiring manager, that's another opportunity to talk about what we offer and the support that we give. But I think if a company's already had a returners program, there is nothing wrong with saying, could I speak to one of your returners? I mean, for example, for us, you'd find case studies and things on websites anyway you could look at. But I think always ask the question, if you want some more information or you want to, hear firsthand from someone, then your recruiter would connect you with the right person. So I think just doing your research, having a look what's online, but also asking the right questions. And then I think it's see how you feel, you'll know if it's authentic when you speak to the company.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of, I think that's a really great tip of asking people if you can speak to someone who's been through that program beforehand is a really great way to get to know the company better, or even better if they've got case studies already on the site or on their profiles. Raj, what would you say for this?
I think I'd kind of second everything Andrea was saying. I think it's very much around how you build that relationship with the recruiter, and kind of ask the right questions, as well as doing research into the company before you get to even interview stages, and then interview stages and beyond.
Yeah. Sarah, any top tips for spotting a true returnship program?
I think if a company has given it thought and is truly committed to it, I think it'd be really obvious from their job descriptions. You should be able to find information quite easily. And if it isn't, you should, for example, with like flexible working, being able to ask, can I see a flexible working policy? Because if they really mean it, they'll have it written down. It will be available. People will understand what that means. And ultimately, I think if somebody's being evasive with you as a candidate, if you need flexible hours or you need part-time, I would find that out sooner rather than later, and like the others have said, have that conversation with your recruiter, because also I wouldn't waste your time as a candidate to find out you get to an offer stage and actually they want you in 5 days a week, and or maybe down the line we can think about it. You should be able to have that conversation and those things put in place from day one. If a company really wants to support you and include you, they'll do it and make that quite obvious to you. So that's what I would suggest.
Amazing, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the actual application process. So whether that's writing up your CV in a Word document and a PDF, or whether that's filling out the forms on the application itself. If I've had let's say I've had a big gap, so much longer than the sort of 18 months, but sort of 5-10 years, more similar to I'm not familiar with the technology we may be using anymore, or one of the questions in the chat was around, what if they ask me for my previous salary? I don't want to put a 10-year-old salary because things have changed a bit since then. How would you recommend organizing a CV when you've got a really significant gap? What kind of skills might we highlight? What kind of experiences would you be looking for on someone's CV? Sarah, if you want to go first.
Well, the way we do it is we ask application questions. So actually on our standard roles, it is a simple case of you submit a CV, perhaps a covering letter. We do it differently for the returnship program with this in mind, because CV can only tell you so much. So we actually ask application questions, and it is different from what we would do. So it's more it's focusing about what are you interested in, what are you hoping to gain, why Mott MacDonald, and then obviously we can explore that further at interview. In terms of the salary, I would say a big red flag for a company is asking you what your current salary is anyway, in terms of any job hunting. There'll be lots of companies that might ask you for your salary expectations. And I think you've got to be honest and realistic with that too. And it isn't necessarily that I agree with that, but I understand why that might happen. You do not have to disclose your current or previous salaries at all. So I would do a little bit of research about, what do you need realistically? Obviously, there's that element, but what might you expect on the market? And there's a degree of flexibility with that as well, because if it means that if a company can bring you on, put you on more work with the aim of actually, for example, they might bring you on the lower of a banding to give you that flexibility, to give you that experience, but the aim of actually then you get re-benchmark at the end of your placement, and that's discussed up front, and that's what happens. I think that's a good way of approaching things, but don't tell them your salary.
Yeah, that is really helpful. We actually have built a really great tool for this on Flexa, which we call the salary negotiation score, but it would also work perfectly for this situation, where you enter in your sort of years of experience. It doesn't have to be right now. It could be, well, I have 15 years of experience, but it was 10 years ago. And this is my role. This is my job function. And it will tell you, we can benchmark that against, are you low paid? So you could put in the last salary you had, or a guess of a salary that you think it should be around. And that will be able to tell you, is that towards the bottom of the market, in the middle, or would that be very high for that role? And being able to see that and have a comparison, I think, could be really helpful if your sort of salary expectations are maybe a decade behind where we currently are. Raj, any tips on the CV application front? Do you also use application questions or a traditional CV?
So ours is more looking at kind of a CV. There is an application form that needs to be completed, but we will look at CV. And I think if there is an organisation out there that is true to a returnship programme, I think it won't. The recruiters and the managers won't really be interested in, well, when was your last role, but more around what skills have maybe you've developed whilst you've been on a career break, or what skills do you have that will be aligned to the roles that you're applying for. So the way that we did it is we had specific, the advert was very much situated around specific areas of the business. So for example, if we were hiring in sales, it would be a sales advert, and kind of vice versa. And we'll be really showcasing on the job description what skills we'll be looking for to fit into that business area. So I think rather than think around a traditional CV and look at, well, this is the role that I've been in and this is what the role consisted of, think more around what skills have you maybe obtained or you have already that fit to the I guess the roles that you're applying for, and how can you showcase those at the top of your CV so it's able to kind of talk to the job description. And I think a couple of people have already mentioned in the chat around, it's not only selling yourself to the business, but it's also the business selling yourself to them. I think it's how do you have that two-way fold? So in this situation, the job description is going to sell to the candidate to apply for that role. And that has to be appealing, right, as well. So you need to think about what skills are they looking for, what does the role entail, but how do you flip that in terms of moving away from the less traditional CV and focusing more on what you can bring to that role and making sure that you entail that.
Yeah, and such an important point. It is a two-way interview. Everyone's got to feel happy with the outcome. Andrea, how about you?
Sorry, I was having a problem turning my microphone back on. Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I think from a CV perspective, obviously the personal profile and kind of outlining maybe your top skills at the front of the CV. So actually you're bringing your experience out as the first thing that the recruiter is reading in your CV. So you've got your previous, skills outlined. And then I think if you're happy to share what you've done on your career break, I think that's nice to have on the CV if you're comfortable with that. And then obviously into the previous experience. Someone has put a comment in around how important is LinkedIn. I would say that when you're applying for roles or a returners program, it will be based on your application and the CV you've attached or the questions you've answered. So LinkedIn wouldn't necessarily be looked at as a complementary part of the screening process. But I would say LinkedIn is really quite important if you are looking for an opportunity, because lots of companies and their recruitment teams will use LinkedIn to find talent. So I think whilst it wouldn't necessarily be looked at in the process when you've applied for something, it's used by many recruiters to find talent. So if your LinkedIn profile has all your skills on it and the right location on it and all those things, then you're much more likely to come up in a search and people actually reach out to you for opportunities. So just to answer that one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely look at LinkedIn profiles when I'm hiring. It's definitely part of that process. Sarah, do you put a lot of emphasis on LinkedIn profiles? How does that fit into the equation?
Same as Andrea, actually. We don't use it in any way to screen candidates. If you apply to us, it generally is the recruiters are using them to find people to share about opportunities, as Andrea says. So I wouldn't worry about that. But again, I agree with everything Andrea said. If you are searching for a role, LinkedIn is a really great place to be. But again, you haven't got to worry about that gap because it's not being assessed in that way. So yeah, agree.
Amazing. I'm going to go to another question. Rebecca has asked, if I have only had entry-level experience before my career break, how should I position myself, or how can I seek out roles specifically if I've only got entry-level experience? I don't know, Raj, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I think it's more around, well, what with the role that you were doing and what the role that you're looking to apply to is. And I think for any employer trying to kind of match those two together is making sure that they're giving you the best possible chance of succeeding in any role. So making sure that they're not, if they're like in our situation where we are looking for roles based on experience, we've got an accountability for that as well in terms of how do we support you to find the right role with the right team so that you get all that support coming through. I think, like I've said before, kind of focus on any kind of maybe entry level qualifications that you've got, or any skills that you can kind of develop into role. And I'll give an example of, we had some customer service advisors within BT who are our kind of contact centre back out to the customers. And I think it's just thinking about, even when you're looking at the job description that you're applying for, that somebody gave me a feedback to say, actually, I can't apply for that role because I don't have stakeholder management. But I think it's just adapting in that situation. The stakeholder management for that particular person would be the customer on the other end of the phone. So I think it's just thinking a little bit broader than just because it's worded as stakeholder management and not customer, it doesn't mean you don't have those skill sets. And how can you relate to some of the stuff that's being asked in the job description and tailor your CV to that?
I love that. I think that's really great advice of, don't discount yourself because the wording is different on the skills. Yeah. Sarah, Andrea, anything you'd add for people specifically in the kind of entry level early experience space?
I think it's going to depend on the company and roles, really. So, there'll be a whole plethora of things. I mean, for example, we've had a returner role where actually they needed to have, we've kept kind of essential experience to an absolute bare minimum. So what do they actually need to be able to do? Well, they need to be able to use Excel, or they need to have a good grasp of maths. But beyond that, actually, it didn't matter what setting. So I think it's just a case of the role, really. And again, as Raj says, like aligning your skill set. And hopefully a company has done a good job of looking at their job descriptions and their adverts that they've put out and trying to, de-jargon them as well, which is what we have tried to do specifically for that reason. So, focus on your skills and how that can transfer across, and I think you'll be fine.
Amazing. And I think this might be relevant to the next question from Amrita, who's saying, I want to return to my career, but in a different position. Do I have to start from entry level, even if I have 4 years of working experience? What do we think about this one, with switching to a completely different field, completely different role? Andrea, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, sorry. I think it depends what, I think just talked about what the actual requirement is of the role. So when you're actually looking to apply for either a returnship program or to an actual role, it's looking at that minimum criteria and seeing whether or not actually, if it's in a different field, do you have that experience, or would the company offer some training program to support you with that? If you're looking to completely reskill into something different, something like an apprenticeship route could always be a good option, applying for an apprenticeship program as opposed to a returners program. So actually you're getting upskilled into a different profession. And also I think it depends whether the skills are transferable from what you did before into what you're looking to do now, because if they are transferable, then you've got every opportunity for that role. So I think it's about making sure you read the job description and whether or not you've got the right transferable skills for it.
Yeah, very similar to what Raj was saying around focusing on the skills and the transferable skills rather than necessarily on the job titles. Amazing. Sarah, anything to add on this with a career switch?
I don't think so. I think I agree with everything that's been said. I don't necessarily think it means you have to start at the bottom, but I do think it will require potentially an element of flexibility from your side. So it might mean that you have to take a bit of a slight salary dip, or with the aim of building that back up. So I think it depends. It's about having honest conversations as well. So aligning yourself with the skills, but having an honest conversation with recruiters as well.
Yeah, amazing. There was a really great question here, which I've just lost. Here we go. Andrew asked, and I think a lot of people will relate to this. He asked, how do recruiters view people who've been taking a break due to burnout, but are now looking to return to some level of employment? So I guess there's two parts of this question. One is related to burnout as a topic and taking a break for that reason, but also I guess some level of employment, to me at least, implies perhaps not full-time, which we covered a bit earlier. But how would you approach this if this was a candidate coming to you, or if you were the candidate? Raj, do you want to kick off with this?
Yeah, so I think if I was the candidate, I think I would be really assessing myself first in terms of what do I need to return back? What support do I need to return back into the workplace? So I'm really clear on my expectations when I'm having a conversation, whether that be with the recruiter or the hiring manager. What is that adaptability that I need, and making sure that I have that support moving in. I think from a BT perspective, we wouldn't want anyone to kind of come in and feel not supported. And for that individual to then experience another relapse of burnout because we're not supporting them in the right way. So I think it's just more around be really clear in terms of what you need to move into that role, but don't be afraid to talk about the fact that the reasons. I mean, if you're comfortable with it, don't be afraid to say this. I was off on a career break due to burnout, because I think there's a little bit of stigma attached to it at the moment, but I think the more and more people that you talk to, there are so many people that have experienced that type of burnout situation, and if anything, there's just more support out there to kind of tailor yourself to working back into that environment again. So and I also think don't be afraid to kind of push yourself out, maybe into a new role, or maybe if it's another kind of level, as long as you're clear on what you need, so that the managers or the relevant teams are able to kind of support you coming back into the business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The honesty, if you feel able to do that, you feel like you can be transparent, will enable you to get the right kind of support. And I think that's a great point. Sarah, anything to add around the burnout question?
I think for me personally, I suppose it really depends on how you feel about it, because it's highly personal, isn't it? And it is totally on you whether you choose to share that information. If it were me, I think I'd perhaps focus more on what I need from a role. So as Raj says, looking at what are you looking for? Is it that you're looking for part-time? Are you looking for less responsibility? And I think what I'd be thinking about is, so say if you've gone in for a particular level of role and actually you're looking now to perhaps go into a more junior position, I think it's the explanation of why, and it is quite okay to say, that I'm not looking for that level of responsibility anymore. I still want to utilize my skill set, but actually I'm looking for something that is much more compatible with my life and my family life, or whatever it might be. And I think that's okay to say as well. And I also think as well, you need to feel that you're in a safe space. So, a lot of recruiters would have spoke to a lot of different people, but actually it's making sure, where is that information used, in terms of, can you be sure that at some point from a hiring manager, people aren't going to make silly assumptions. So I think it's much better to focus on what you do want, what skills you do have, what you're looking for, and be really clear and asking those questions, and not so much focused on explaining why you might have had a gap. But it's about spinning it to making it work for you, I think. And then at a later point, you can talk about those things. That's how I personally would approach that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, Andrea, I'm going to kind of keep on this topic, but bring in a bit of another question. Hattie has asked, would you recommend being honest about what you did in a career break if it was for personal reasons or wasn't a choice? And I think this is relevant because we can sometimes feel like some career breaks are more valid than others. How would you suggest approaching that?
I think it comes back to what you want, what you're happy to talk about, but also so many comments in the chat, which we've said before, but around it being a two-way process. And when you're applying for a company and speaking to a company, it has to be the company's right for you, and the job is a good fit. So I think hopefully you would feel that you can approach and talk about that with your recruiter. Anything you talk to your recruiter about and get support with, that shouldn't be passed to the hiring manager unless you say that you're happy for that to be discussed. So I think it's about knowing that it will be treated in confidence with the recruiter that you speak to, and managed in a way that you're happy with through your recruitment process. In our company, we ask everyone who applies if they need any reasonable adjustments or if there's anything that they require in the process, and that's where we want people to tell us if there is more support they need, or anything they might want to talk about. So I think for me, if you're comfortable talking about it, then I would absolutely bring it up on your calls with your recruiter, and discuss whether you're happy to share that on further for the recruitment journey.
Amazing. So we're going to do one more question. And this is actually from Molly, who's obviously from Flexa, those of you who know Flexa and know Molly. And she is asking, again, from back to the employer side, have you seen a positive impact in your data around diversity and the perception of inclusivity since starting Returnships programs? I'd love to understand this one. Raj, maybe you can start us off with this.
Yeah, so we definitely have. And I think it's more around the diversity of thought that has been brought into teams. And I think we had a lot of skeptical managers around what type of investment they're going to have to put into returners. What does it mean for their teams? Are they going to have to take a little bit of a backward step? And I think I can confidently sit here and say that if we were to interview them today, they will actually say that they're wrong in terms of that. And I think it's just more investment back into how we see quite a diverse team kind of forming together, and the different experiences that they bring.
Amazing. Sarah, how about you?
It was really interesting. So last year we ran the first returner program that happened in the company for a few years. And it's those teams that were the first ones to come back for this time around and say, we want more of those candidates, please. In terms of diversity data, I think actually it's one of the areas where we have had a 50-50 split between women and men being hired as well. So that's been interesting, because obviously, especially within engineering, it isn't a 50-50 industry. So it really has helped from that perspective. But it really has, in terms of impression from the business, we've had such positive feedback, and it is only gaining more momentum as we go through. So definitely worth doing.
Brilliant. Andrea?
Sorry. Yeah, it definitely made a huge difference. And I think after our first program, it really built momentum, and then other business areas wanted to also, move with returner roles and ring fencing roles for returners when they saw the impact. And, it's the diversity of thought that our returners bring, the value that their career breaks brought to them. There's a huge amount of commitment from people coming back into the workplace. They really want to work. They've had some time out and they really want to come back. So it's I think, educating our business that actually this is a really valuable talent pool with some great talent that is often overlooked. So I think it did make a massive difference for us, and actually bringing returners in then kind of made more of our managers open to, looking at our returners program.
I love to hear that actually the outcome was we'd like more of these, not less. That's fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining. This has been absolutely brilliant. I know there are some questions we didn't manage to get to, and we'll try and cover those off on a blog. And for all sorts of amazing companies that have returnships programs, you'll be able to go and find them on Flexa if you want to learn anything more about any of the companies we've been showing off today. Thank you all for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you.